Because one would go like, how on earth can one run 5,000 kilometers?
Yeah.
And the answer is, it's all inner. All the power is coming from within. And it's not some like mystical thing where you're trying to like lift a car off of somebody. It's the power of happiness manifesting every step of the day.
Hello, beautiful people. On today's podcast, we have Sanjay Rawal. Sanjay spent 15 years working on grassroots peace-building campaigns under the direction of his teacher, Sri Chinmoy. He is also the film director of the documentaries Food Chains, Gather, and 3,100 Run and Become, which features several Indigenous cultures in their quest for peace through long-distance running. What I love about this conversation is the enrichment, full of depth, passion, and love. This is genuinely one of my all-time favorite conversations from the To Be Human podcast, and it's one personally I will be listening back to more than once. I want you to go on your own journey in this one, so I won't share too much of what is inside. I will share that we do derive a lot of our conversation on the lessons learned from filming 55 days of the 3,100 Self-Transcendence run. A 3,100 mile, that's 5,000 kilometers, run around less than a 1 kilometer block in Queens, New York. We discuss the beautiful relationships between endurance and growth, the beauty and joy that can be found in suffering, and the mindset of those who finish this phenomenal feat. There is also a special contribution to my dear Australian friend Stephen Redfern at the end. He's just arrived in New York to experience his own path of self-transcendence. Stephen, I will preface this now with saying the beautiful Native American Navajo people believe that Mother Earth is also under the sidewalk. I am excited to further share this with you and with all. Please enjoy. Welcome to Be Human, Sanjay.
Thanks so much, Jenna. I'm really, really excited to chat.
Yeah, me too. So where I love starting, Sanjay, is normally with sort of the guests, one of the guests' sort of defining moments in their life. And to my understanding, sort of like a turning point in your life was when your life began sort of calling you to Sri Chinmoy. So I would love if you kind of share more about that time in your life and sort of the change of trajectory that you took during that time.
Wow, that's a great place to start. I'm in my late 40s now, and I'm going to go back to when I was 19. And you know, when you're in your late teens, you think you know everything.
Right.
And you think you've got everything planned out for you. And you don't really know sometimes how fortunate you are. Most of the time, we're taught to measure opportunity in terms of financial possibility, in terms of relationship possibilities, and that stuff's all good. But at the same time, I think we spend too much time, particularly when we're young, thinking that we have those goals really all figured out. And so for me, I was at university, doing kind of normal stuff and started feeling like an earthquake underneath me. Like everything that I was doing wasn't correct. And I was at a good university in California where I grew up. And I was like, I'm not smart anymore, but back then I was really smart. I was getting good grades. I was like, good Asian kid planning to be a doctor. And all of a sudden I started feeling a tremendous amount of self-doubt. And it's like, sometimes you have self-doubt when you're about to make a momentary decision or like make some big instantaneous decision. But I was like having doubts about like life in general.
Wow.
And I realized, and a lot of us have these moments, this kind of like call at certain points in our life. And I've seen a lot of people miss that call.
Yeah.
And that's why I feel I was fortunate, because I felt like there was a deeper goal to life than the material. And I began, for whatever reason, I began looking for a teacher. it made sense to me that, at university, if you wanted to study something really technical, you would find a teacher that taught you that. And I felt like if I wanted to really learn about myself, I needed to go out and find a legitimate teacher, a guru, a master. And I was going to school in a city called Berkeley, California, which is kind of known for being like a hippie center of the U.S. And every spiritual teacher that one could imagine passed through that town, or their students did. And many times across the way, I thought that I found a path, jumped into it wholeheartedly, as one should, I think, and quickly learned that it was not for me. Like one of the first paths, this is how dumb we were at 19. Like one of the first paths, it's like they wanted us to all rent tuxedos and like go to like a 5-star hotel in San Francisco and like, eat this fancy food and listen to the teacher talk. And it seemed so out of left field. And yeah, I joined a cult for a brief moment. I mean, I was 19, so I didn't know. And then like my college roommate's dad was a lawyer, and so he came the next day with like a stack of information about like how I had just joined a cult. But it helped me realize like what sort of feeling I needed to have to develop a real connection with the teacher. And fast forward a few months later, I went to a class given by one of Sri Chinmoy's students. And again, every path is different, but unlike that first path, we didn't have to like go to meditations in tuxedos. We didn't have to spend money we didn't have on like fancy dinners. Like the teacher wasn't charging anything like in the kind of traditional Eastern way. And I felt that his students were genuine. And I felt that his students had the kind of peace that I wanted. Now, again, I'm 19 and every path is different, but his was very much about discipline. So the student was telling me, like, if you want to be Sri Chinmoy students, he has 3 rules. And they're 3 simple rules, like no drinking. I was like, okay, I can do this for like a few months. No smoking. I was like, yeah, I don't really smoke that much, but yeah, I could probably give that up for a year. And the third one was celibacy.
Right.
It was trying to go straight towards universal love, where you realize that love is in everything and you can feel love everywhere. I mean, I had a hard enough time trying to feel love with one person. So I was like, okay, I can do this for like 2 weeks. And so it's like, I just said, okay, I'm going to take a little step into this pool and like, I'm not going to try. It's like, and just get enough from 2 weeks to last the rest of my life.
Right.
But like 2 weeks became 4 weeks, became a month, became 3 months. And I realized for the first time in a few years, I was really happy.
Wow.
Right? Like nobody ever teaches you to be happy, right? Like when you're a kid, you go like happiness is ice cream. Happiness is like, watching your favorite show or going to a beach or whatever. It didn't really feel like something that you could like feel all the time. But Sri Chinmoy's path was very much about finding happiness in every moment and without having to like go live in a monastery. Not that those paths are bad, but as a 19-year-old going to college, it was hard enough telling my parents that like I was doing this very disciplined kind of activity. And if I said that I was going to quit university and go live in an ashram, I mean, they would have like handcuffed me to like my desk. And for them, after that, it was just, I realized that not everybody has to do the same thing.
Yeah.
And that even though outwardly the path I was on seemed so bonkers and so antithetical to like our Western lifestyle, at the same, for me, it felt so natural and simple. And 30 years later, like I see the opportunities that Sri Chinmoy's path has given me in terms of personal development. And that's why I look back and go like, Oh my God, I was so dumb at 19, but I did one good thing.
Right.
Like, thank God 19-year-old Sanjay wasn't as much of an idiot as he normally was.
And talk to me, what is the practice of finding happiness in every moment? What does that look like?
You know, it starts with discipline. And I learned very quickly that discipline doesn't mean rigidity,
Hmm.
and that in discipline is more freedom than
Right.
anyone can imagine. Like we've got a bunch of parts to our being, right? Like we're not we've got a body, but you wouldn't say like I am my body. We've got a mind, but you wouldn't say like I am my mind. We've got emotions. Again, it's like that's not entirely who you are. We've got a heart, like a spiritual heart that like yearns, that wants connection. And deeper, like I learned we have something called a soul, like something really deep within where happiness and peace exists.
Hmm.
I mean, it's like you were mentioning, like, the peace and the joy you felt going out into the ocean in the morning.
Right.
Like that peace comes from the environment, but it also triggers something from within you to come out.
Hmm.
And the spiritual life is understanding how to get to that place within you that connects with the feeling of peace or love. It's like finding that little door and
Yeah.
opening it.
Hmm.
Now, of course, there's usually a lot of stuff that's like blocking that door, like
Right.
boxes, and sometimes like there's like a desk wedged underneath the handle, like all sorts of things. And and that generally comes from the mind, right? Like the mind is always trying to like think. The mind is always trying to divide, saying and or measure like you should be doing this, you should be feeling that, or it's like you're not feeling enough, you're feeling too little, and it's never really satisfied with where it's at. So the discipline is learning how to quiet your mind. Of
Hmm.
course, like, you know, that's not so easy, but it's like most people call that meditation. It's like quieting the mind to find the door of the heart and learning how to open that. And then learning what it feels like to just be feeling those pure ideals within yourself.
Hmm.
And then once you kind of really get used to that, then when you're out with other people or you're out in the world, you can bring those feelings out. You can experience them. Sometimes those feelings protect you. Sometimes they make you like make better decisions. But ultimately, the great thing is being able to offer those feelings to the people that you love. And it's like that combined sense of like discipline through silence and then discipline through sharing. That's kind of helped me to really make the most of each moment or each
Hmm.
minute or hour or day.
And through meditation, because I'm certainly a beginner in it, but to my understanding, there's certainly different forms of approaching meditation. When we sort of talk about the desk under the door and sort of wanting to get sort of into that opening of the door, do you sort of remember back then what was sort of a good starting point for you? Because I found personally being an observer of my thoughts didn't open the door as much as sort of going into my body.
I can totally relate. And that's interesting
Mm.
because like the first types of meditations I did, one would say it was like the path of the mind. Again, like no harm, no foul, but it was like repeating mantras. It was
Mm.
really trying to like stop my thoughts. And that's definitely a path. But the one thing that attracted me to Sri Chinmoy's teachings, and I'd read this in other people's writings as well, was trying to understand how to meditate in the heart.
Mm.
And it's like the mind is thought. And so you're constantly trying to force your mind to not have any thoughts. And the mind is kind of like a puppy, you can only get it to do something for like a minute. but I think it might be different too for men rather than women. Like, it was really hard for me to find my heart. I didn't even know what that meant. And so the beginning exercises that helped me were, I mean, the heart identifies, and it seems like an abstract concept, but the early meditations that helped me understand what that meant was, like visualizing that I was sitting at a beach and the sun was setting, and all I heard were the waves and the birds. And I felt the warmth of the setting sun on my face. And I look out at the sun and at the sea. And even though the sea might have waves on the surface, underneath the surface, there's silence. And that silence is powerful. And you begin to identify with what you're visualizing. And you begin to feel a sense of fullness, like a depth, like a peace. And that I couldn't really find in my mind. So those visualizations, really, they're kind of like you're trying to invoke a feeling. Yeah. Like, if you want to feel love, imagine something that gives love to you. Imagine, if you want to invoke peace, imagine a setting that gives you that peace, like the beauty of the setting sun. If you want to feel beauty, try to identify with the most beautiful flower and imagine that reality inside you. I did that for like 4 or 5 months, like religiously. And all of a sudden, one day, it worked.
Wow.
And I was just like, oh my God, that's it.
Yeah.
Like, that's the feeling that I have been looking for. And it kind of forces you then to like stop being a mean person, at least to some degree, because like, it's like you feel that in the morning or you feel that in a moment, and you try to do your best to keep that feeling going.
Yeah.
And it's like, if you're angry, if you're like thinking poor thoughts or mean thoughts about negative thoughts about other people, that feeling goes away in an instant.
Wow.
And when you're a beginner, sometimes you go, oh man, I just kind of lost my morning meditation. It's gone. And then it's gone the rest of the day.
Yeah.
And then it's like, oh, the next morning, if you have that same feeling, you go, okay, I need to be a good person for at least an hour longer today.
Yeah, I love it. And it kind of plays into when you were speaking about that. I'm like, it certainly is a practice. And then my mind went to like, well, it's that discipline of practice. But then it made me sort of reflect on what you said. It's not about sort of feeling imprisoned by that discipline of practice, but it's about feeling the freedom in it. How do we tap into that? Is the freedom from what you're working your way, you're on the path to experiencing?
I think a good analogy in a weird way is running. Most of us who practice some long distance cardiovascular rhythmic sport like swimming, cycling, running, rowing, paddleboarding, if you want to be able to enjoy the result, and what I mean by result is like, some point in that discipline, your mind will be clear, your breath will be full, and you'll have moments of just happiness. Sometimes it comes at the very, very end of that exercise, but then you realize all the things you need to do to get there. Like, let's say you want to get there every day. Well, you have to take care of your body, whether you stretch, whether you do mobilization exercises. You've got to do the right preparation. You might need to do something at the end of the day, like hours after that exercise, to like recover. You probably need to eat a little bit better. You also need to carve out the time in the day and give it importance. And you find that with all that rigidity, all of that discipline, the result is the experience of freedom. For that like last 10% of your activity, or for the feeling afterwards, you've like put in the time and the effort to earn a sense of freedom. And that's the spiritual life. You're putting it, you're doing the right types of activities that will result in a feeling of freedom. Like freedom isn't static. Freedom's not something that just exists and doesn't move. It's like freedom is really an energetic state. It's almost like you have to catch it. You have to, like, for the surfers out there, it's like you literally have to get into the flow of that energy. And like, yeah, it exists all around us, but it's almost like a sprite constantly moving. And if you kind of get in its slipstream, then it's like there's no thoughts, there's no actions, there's no activities. You're just really going. In athletics, people term that state flow. And the time I spent with Native American runners and Native American athletes, I learned that they prepare incessantly to experience that sort of flow every time that they run. And the way they do that is by understanding that the activity that they're about to do, in this case, running, is an offering. It's a way to really connect with the divine, with that sense of energy, that like unbridled energy that is very pure and, in a sense, liberating. So it's like that with the spiritual life too. It's like there's a lot of preparation, there's a process, and the discipline and the daily activity of meditation really teaches you what that process is like and how to initiate that process, every single day.
Can you share what spirituality means to you in relation to sort of what you're talking about?
That's a great question. What I found personally is that if I want to define what spirituality means, like in one word, it's the idea of oneness. Sometimes people use the word universality, and from an Eastern standpoint, the ultimate oneness is to realize that the entire universe is inside you. If you believe, and I don't even want to say believe, like in the East, like our concept of divinity has both form and it's also forms. It's like if the seeker wants to imagine that divinity is in the shape of a person, or is embodied by a particular religious figure, whether it's Krishna or Jesus or the Buddha, or if they want to feel like it's just cosmic power, whatever the seeker wants, you ultimately realize that idea of divinity is you. You are that. Like, you are in it, and infinity is inside you. And of course, practically, taking a lot of big steps back, the practical manifestation of that for me in a really simple way is to realize that the best parts of me are the same as the best part in other people.
Yeah.
And that if I'm focusing on the best part of me, I have to focus on the best parts of other people. You begin to realize that even though people might be at different levels of their progression, they might want different things in life, the energy that you're seeking, that you're calling divinity, is trying to manifest itself through everything. And that every human being, whether they know it, is returning to that place as a home. So that's where the idea of oneness is. And it's like, even though that seems so out there and so abstract, you can practice that in your day-to-day life. You can be a little kinder to people. You can be a little more sympathetic. You can understand that we all actually want the same things in life. And ultimately, you can feel that we're all going to the same destination. That realization of our complete identification with the entire universe. And I find that back to being a good person and being a bad person, the more I try to put those attitudes into practice, the more I begin to feel that in meditation. And vice versa. The more of that I feel in meditation, the more I want to put it into practice.
Yeah.
And what that means to me is like, it's like that visualization of the ocean. You know, at some stage in meditation, you actually feel as wide as the ocean. You feel as deep as the ocean. Like you begin to feel that vastness. And like when you come out of those types of meditations, you see the world much, much differently.
Yeah.
And even that feeling begins to dissipate, you've experienced that it is actually a reality.
So, moving in a similar vein, I would love to speak to you about your beautiful film, 3100 Run and Become, that is essentially based on the Self-Transcendence 3100 mile run held in Queens, New York. Where I want to start with this is, can you please share what is self-transcendence? Sort of why are they using running in relation to self-transcendence?
Ooh, so like before I joined Sri Chinmoy's path, even though I'd read a little bit of spiritual philosophy, I'd never heard of the term self-transcendence.
Yeah.
And even in a lot of later study of different mystical texts, I realized it's almost a completely new distillation. People in various spiritual traditions have talked about the universe being infinite, but not necessarily the idea that the universe as a consciousness is expanding. I'll get out of this like woo-woo world in a second. But like, you know, like physicists have said the universe is expanding, right?
Yeah.
Like, what does that even mean? It means that, I mean, who knows really, but it's like, it means that even infinity can get bigger. And that's what's happening with the universe. It's so large for our human minds, we might as well effectively say it's infinity, and it's getting bigger. So it's kind of tapping into the idea that everything in the universe is expanding somehow. Like, yeah, the physical universe seems to be expanding physically, like not smart enough to understand why. But as human beings, from when we really start trying to become ourselves, when we try to like, when we're kind of like not kids anymore, we're progressing, right? I mean, we might think that we've gone backwards in terms of experiences of sorrow or forwards in terms of experiences of joy. But the fact of the matter is, like, our bodies are aging, the amount of experiences that we have is expanding. And who we are today is not who we were yesterday.
Yeah.
Now, in the East, people try to ideally take positive experiences and negative experiences as the same. They try to believe that everything is an experience of growth. And when you're kind of in that frame of mind where there's like no success, no failure, but everything is an experience, then you begin to touch on what self-transcendence means. It's this idea that we can constantly go beyond our previous achievements. We can go beyond our previous state of mind. I mean, the fact of the matter is, we're already doing that. And it's like, if you look across the span of weeks or months of years or years, that's already happening. But if you consciously try to become aware of that, if you consciously try to make that progression faster, that's where you find happiness. That's where you find joy. It's the idea of like looking at yourself with love, but with self-awareness, going like, yeah, I'm happy today and I'm satisfied today. I'm grateful today. But there's really no reason why I can't be happier tomorrow. I can't be more grateful tomorrow. I can't be more joyful tomorrow. And spirituality is trying to figure out how to do that. And the only way, the first step in really doing that is like not being attached to what's positive or what's negative. To go like, I can be happy even if something bad happens. Or in that experience of suffering, I need to be able to find joy. Like in the worst moments of life, at some stage, if I want to get out of that sorrow, I need to find joy. Now, this is where we get to running of all things,
Of
because
all things.
anybody who's run has realized that you get to a point where you're at the limit of your capacity. Mm. And the first thing you want to try to do is extend that capacity. Because when you extend that capacity, there's a feeling of achievement.
Yeah.
It's like, and it might not happen every single day. Like if you can only run 2 miles today, maybe tomorrow you need to take a rest, but with enough practice, you realize that, okay, my 2 miles a day is now 5 miles a day. The enjoyment that my body is getting, the satisfaction that my mind is getting is becoming greater because I can spend more time doing this. Mm-hmm. At the same time, there are points in a run where you might suffer. You might be feeling a pretty significant amount of discomfort. But more often than not, when you get through that, there is literally like a bucket of joy at the end of that. Like you unlock a physical hurdle and you open a door of satisfaction. And that kind of happens pretty regularly. And when you run, you begin to learn that discomfort is not a bad thing. That when you're exerting yourself, there can be joy even in that experience. You can just realize, okay, I'm having an experience of pain, but is pain really a bad thing? Is there some state of mind where I can go right through this and not have it affect my experience of happiness? That's what they call the flow state. That's when you get into a state of exercise where you're not thinking about pain, you're not thinking about energy output. And very often, a pro athlete will say this to you as well. Very often, and you've had people like Dean Karnazes that have had this experience on your podcast. Very often, when you get into that flow state, you start achieving things that you could have never imagined.
Yeah.
So real self-transcendence is going beyond your inner limitations. And very often, although it might not be instantaneous, when you go beyond those inner limitations, you go beyond your outer limitations. And running or endurance exercise, but especially running, is a way to experience that. Like you might not ever think you could do a marathon, but once you do it, you go, I can't believe I did that. That was unimaginable 6 months ago.
In relation to this run, you spent the whole 52 days there filming. Did you find, because to my understanding, people were running an average of 60 miles a day, which is, for the Aussies here, 96 kilometers a day for those 52 days. Did you find when they get into that sort of moment of suffering, are they all pulling on the same mindset to bring themselves to that experience of growth and joy? Or is it kind of personal to the individual?
So that's a very good question. So like the 3,100 mile race is almost 5,000 kilometers.
Yeah.
It's like 4,889 kilometers, 4,989 kilometers. And it takes place around a nearly 1 kilometer sidewalk block in Queens, New York City. Of course, people would go, that's crazy. Like, why wouldn't you just run across the United States? Yeah. People do. And the issue is that you're constantly worried about like traffic. You can't use the restroom when you need to, and you can't get access to food and water when you need it. And people doing 100 kilometers or so a day need about 8,000 or 9,000 calories at minimum. So it's a lot of food, it's a lot of water. And so it's physically tremendously daunting. And it's the kind of activity that if you don't have the mental fortitude, you wouldn't even be able to get to the starting line.
Yeah.
And most ultra distance races cap at about 100K or 100 miles, and then you're done and you recover for a week or a month or a year or whatever. But when you finish your 100K on the first day of the 3,100-mile race, you realize you've got to do it the next day. And so the concept of suffering has to become minimal. And in a sense, it's like what most of us mere mortals, myself included, think of as suffering cannot be suffering. You cannot even let that create a feeling of suffering in you. It's like you're working very, very hard. The key to not suffering or breaking down is to feel a sense of purpose, I should say, when you're running, and feel a sense of joy, really. I spent some time on a particular Native American reservation where people called the Hopi live. And an elder there said that running is finding joy in the exertion. And it's something that we can all do, but the 3,100-mile runners in their training, they are trying to go into what we consider work, what we consider exertion, and dive deep into it and pull out that feeling of joy. Like, that doesn't make any sense to them, from what I've learned, and definitely not to me, to run 5,000 kilometers if it's not an experience of joy. Like, it can't be that you run for 52 days and that you get the joy at the end. It's not possible. That said, across the 25, 26 years that this run has been happening, with an average of 5 to 15 people every year, there have been people that were like former special forces that could just gut their way through 52 days or got their way through 48 days of running 110 kilometers a day. It's like they had the mental strength to destroy everything. And there was one gentleman, a man named Kobe Oren, and he's told the story publicly. He did the 3,100 in 2019. He's coming back this year to do it as well. He was a former Israeli Special Forces soldier. And through the first 1,000 miles, it was military discipline. But he looked around him and he saw that for the most part, everyone else was happy.
Wow.
They were happy, like in the state of like extreme suffering where everything's going wrong and he's grunting through everything. People were smiling and he realized, okay, I can win with my mental power, but I won't create any memories. Like, I won't remember like the feeling of happiness that it looks like everybody else is feeling right now. So that's the trick. And that's why this race is at once bonkers and is at once kind of teachable, because one would go like, how on earth can one run 5,000 kilometers?
Yeah.
And the answer is, it's all inner. All the power is coming from within. And it's not some like mystical thing where you're trying to like lift a car off of somebody. It's the power of happiness manifesting every step of the day. Now, from a practical standpoint, like the runners say, like, yeah, the first 4 or 5 days are kind of torture because the mind is coming to the realization that it's going to have to do that every single day. But in my own experience, having done one 6-day race at a period of time, and I think this is why people do ultra distance activities in general, at some point, the mind stops fighting what you're doing. And it's like what we talked about meditation. Like, when it stops fighting, all these other doors start opening. And every runner without fail says that they do this race because when those other doors open, they're in a state of sheer joy. I mean, sometimes they even use the word bliss. For some people, it comes on day one and lasts until the end. Some people, it comes on day 10 or day 20, but everyone says that they do it because they know at some point they're going to have that experience, and that experience is not going to stop. Yes, there's pain. Yes, there's blisters. Yes, there's heat. Yes, there's indigestion, etc. But when you're feeling that kind of fountain of joy, the suffering in those other negative experiences dissipates. And that to me is really, it's mind-blowing.
Absolutely mind-blowing. I've heard you speak to something similar on Dr. Ranjan Chatterjee's podcast, and it was an interesting kind of moment between Doctor and yourself, and you were speaking to, you feel like a lot of what people experience as injury has to do with mindset. Can you share sort of how this relates to what you've sort of been speaking to?
You know, I'm not a professional body worker, but I've had so many little running issues that I've kind of become one of the bodywork volunteers at the race. And I can, like, legitimately, there are certain injuries in those runners that come from overthinking. Literally. And it's like, I'll kind of explain it if people can visualize. It's like when you're too in your head and you're thinking too much, you know, your brow's furrowed and your neck might be stiff. Now, when your neck is stiff, your upper vertebra are stiff, your lower back is stiff, your hips are stiff. And the point where you can no longer push that stiffness down the chain is in your calves. And runners that don't have mental fluidity have the biggest knots in their calves that you can ever imagine.
Wow.
The star of our movie 3100 Run and Become, Ashprihanal Alto, he has almost no knots when he's running. His mind is so loose, his head is so loose, his body is so fluid. And I didn't really understand why that was until I started, you know, having to kind of work on people's injuries. And except for the acute ones of people like really pulling muscles or having some sort of trauma from falling down or something, it's all mental. It's like if people are in their hearts and free from the worry that their mind creates, their postures become perfect. Their postures almost become like animals. Like a cheetah is not going to have, like, you know, a strained hip. It's like they're so, animals are so one pointed in the connection between their intention and their mobility, their movement, that they don't have the kind of repetitive use injuries that we have. Like imagine if a bear had like repetitive use injuries. Like it's just unfathomable. We're obviously more complicated beings than animals, but you know, when we're in a state of motion, the things that cause us to be inefficient are mental. And there's nowhere that you see that manifested more than the 3100. If people are loose in their mind, they have more mileage. You know, on the days when they're stressed and worried, you literally see their mileage go down. You see them like stopping and stretching. They need massages, all of these things.
That's extremely fascinating. It makes me think of there was a beautiful lady that was shown on your film, an Austrian lady. Was it Samita?
Yeah, Shamita. That's very,
Shamita.
very
I've got a quote of hers here because, yeah, I watched your documentary last night again. And I was particularly listening more intently. And she said something that gave me goosebumps in the moment. And she shared, well, I'll give context actually. So she's in this run and she is not feeling very well. And to my understanding, her partner is her crew member, which always makes for a fun experience in itself. And he was quite concerned about her, rightly so. And she responded to him and she said, "We die when we die, but we also have to live when we live." And I thought that was just such a beautiful statement of hers. And it had me reflecting, and I would love to know your point of view on this. Where is the line for you, particularly throughout this experience of what you've seen, between living and giving it your all in kind of this journey of enduring, but also knowing when to stop or to understand where your limitations are that don't put you on a path, I suppose, to death?
It's a very deep question. And I think that goes back to what we were talking about earlier. There's freedom in there being a completely blurry line between success and failure. Now, if we don't see failure as a negative experience, we literally know when to stop. Most of the time, intuitively, we know where that line is, but usually what pushes us beyond is our ego, is our kind of will to identify ourselves with the particular result. Like we would much rather identify ourselves with success rather than failure. But we don't often realize that we don't have to identify ourselves with either. You can compete in an athletic competition, but the true competition is against yourself. If you measure yourself against other people, you're always going to fail. You really are. It's like one day you might beat somebody, the next day they might beat you, and it's a constant back and forth. And you never realize that there's no satisfaction in that sort of game. But when you're in tune with yourself, when you're in tune with your abilities, when you know where that line is, and you try to stay as close to it as possible without going over it, you can begin to feel self-transcendence. But at the same time, there's wisdom in knowing that there's always another day. There's always another chance to compete. There's always another opportunity further down the road to go beyond, to become more, and to do more. But yeah, I'm sure you've seen a lot of folks who gravitate towards these longer distance events don't know where that line is. And I'll say this because Shamita and her family are good friends of mine. And as people will see when they watch the movie, or those who've seen the movie will know, she had a very difficult time in knowing where that line was. And that was a problem for her.
Yeah, you could really see it in her eyes in that moment, almost this inner conflict between it being a truly spiritual experience and that part of that her mind, that ego that's telling her that at that point in time, if she were to stop, she's fallen short of her goal. And it's kind of this almost like this swirling in her mind of what she wanted to do, which is that's what's so beautiful about your documentary is you capture those really real and raw moments that are part of something like such a big experience for people. And it's certainly, obviously for me, and I'm sure for many viewers, it gets you to sort of reflect on what you would do in a similar experience.
It's so hard.
It's so hard. It really is. And it fascinates me. It's always a question that I pose to people in endurance because I feel like you're so right. It's like we always have that intuitive gut knowing. We really do. But then there's always our mind that's sort of informing us of the ego consequences if we were to sort of stop. And I think it's about, to my understanding, preparing for that before the experience, so you know, I guess, your values or your path for decision making in those sort of really hard moments.
I mean, the difficult thing, right, is like when you know that this is going to be the last chance to achieve something.
Yeah.
And I'm sure you have in your Rolodex or pocket of good friends, you probably have some mountaineers. And like that's the conundrum, right? When you worked for a year, saved up tens of thousands of dollars to go to a Himalayan mountain and created a lot of expectation with all your well-wishers and loved ones. And you end up having to fight the weather, things that are beyond your control. And for those of us like myself who are addicted to like mountain survival stories, you see that the people who survive are the ones who make the right decisions. And really, success is surviving. Success is not fighting things that you can't control. And even in a seemingly benign sphere, like a race that goes around the same block 5,679 laps across 52 days, you would think there's no danger there. But the race now, thankfully, is held in our fall. It started being held in September rather than June, which is the summer month for us in the North, when the movie begins. And those summer races could get up to 37, 38, sometimes 38.5 degrees centigrade. And people have to realize, and this was one of the issues that Shamita faced. It's like everybody else, when we hit those types of days that year in 2016, they realized that the weather was more powerful than them, and that they had to surrender to the weather and surrender all ideas of expectation. And they dropped the number of kilometers they were doing per day significantly. But some runners have classically had a difficult time in knowing that the smart way forward was not necessarily the way that they had planned.
Yeah. I feel like that's one of the beautiful larger lessons of endurance, is like you can show up with a plan, but a lot of the time you're going to have to throw the plan out the window and kind of meet the obstacles as they arise, which actually reminds me, I have a quote of yours from the documentary in relation to this, and you shared, "Your ability to finish a race is directly proportional to your ability to overcome problems and to realize that most problems are not actual problems." Can you speak more to that?
I think that we've all had this experience. Those of us who do any sort of daily exercise or daily activity, there's always a point, even if it's an easy day, where something doesn't feel right. And more often than not, we know from experience that that feeling will dissipate. Those problems will go away, and you begin to kind of understand that by not focusing on the problem loses its power. But if you focus on that problem, it becomes bigger and bigger. It actually starts affecting you more. And sometimes you have to stop. And in hindsight, you look back and go, especially if it happens during a race, you go like, I didn't actually need to stop. Like maybe in my training, I have to learn how to minimize the problems as they come. It's kind of like a life lesson, right? And that's the great thing about these sorts of activities and pursuits, is that you feel exertion during your daily practice of athletics, and you learn that you have to try to find joy in that exertion if you want to have a positive experience. You feel little kinks in your body when you're training, and you can get a sense whether they're going to be damaging or whether they're just short-term manifestations, so that when you get into the real thick of things, you can use your own spiritual power to take away the power of these little problems, or problems that would normally become big for somebody else. You can like enter go into the heart of and really dissemble and figure out what in that experience is the actual problem and how you can take care of it, if that makes any sense.
It does. It reminds me of one of my favorite quotes. The only problem you have is thinking that you have a problem. Otherwise, it's just circumstance, which is it's beautiful, isn't it? And it really speaks into what you shared earlier on in the conversation. It's like there's always an opportunity for growth. And through my experience, through that growth tends to always sort of lead or at least be on the path to joy. So it's like sort of a beautiful encompassing kind of always pulling you back to that sense of growth and joy that you speak to.
And you're right. It's like there's the kind of like fortune cookie message that's like every problem is an opportunity. And like, I mean, there are some problems that do not feel like opportunities, right? Like in life, you go like, this is not an opportunity. This is horrible. This is sorrow. This is sadness. But you realize at some stage that if you want to be happy, you have to reframe how you're feeling.
Right.
And it's impossible to do that right in the moment. We're all human beings. You know, we do feel deep pain, but there's a way out of that pain. You see that physically in the 3,100-mile race because people's toenails fall off. Like people have the
blisters
worst.
The size of tennis balls.
Yeah, like it's like you remember there's a shot in the movie of a Russian runner's blister, and it's like the size of like a baby's head. It's like massive.
It is.
And like he still did 116 kilometers a day. And I think he told himself, like, I'm taking care of it as best as I can. It's not getting worse. It's not getting infected. My foot's not falling off. This sensation that's there constantly, if I think it's the worst pain that ever existed, it's going to debilitate me. But if I just think of it as a reality, it's like you said, it's just circumstance. It's just there. And I realized that it's going to be there whether I cry about it or laugh about it. You know, I might as well laugh about it.
Wow. I'd love to explore that deeper because that's a big one, right? Is like something can be kind of tough, but when you really have that physical pain going on, it's much harder to kind of switch off from it. Would he sort of like, as you're suggesting, would he focus on the sensation and kind of reframe the sensation? Or is he focusing on his heart space? Are you aware of sort of what supported him in being able to sort of continually do sort of over that sort of 100-mile mark per day?
You know, I was actually his handler when he did the race last year in 2021. And this man's name was Vasu from Russia. And that's when I finally kind of understood what we were seeing when we filmed the 2016 race, which he was a part of. It's very much about the heart. You know, if you are extremely happy, and everybody can remember a time when they were, or a moment or a day when they were just joyful, there are really no problems in that moment. It's like just imagine like having a broken leg or a broken arm and then having a very positive experience, like unrelated. You're not thinking about the pain of your arm or the pain of your leg. Like those experiences for that moment, they don't exist as pain. They don't even exist at all. And what I saw with him is that when, like literally when the going got tougher, he began focusing more on his heart. And I mean, it sounds corny, and to me, it actually still sounds corny, but I kind of saw him doing it, and I'm amazed. He would sing spiritual songs. Like everybody like knows something that's spiritual, whether it's religious or whether it's just a very, very deep song that when you sing, you go into like a better part of yourself. He would sing those songs over and over. And it's like they were the kinds of songs that built up like positive emotion. like just a well of like happiness and love and joy. And in his case, gratitude. And it's like that experience of gratitude made him oblivious to the blister, to the
Wow.
pain. And of course, it's
Yeah.
a real injury. And like he would get it treated, once or twice a day from an actual doctor. And it was getting dressed. And the doctor said, like, yeah, it's going to be painful, but it's not going to get infected. Your foot's not going to fall off. And then so he said, okay, there's like pain threshold. The pain is probably like a 7 out of 10. And my joy is like a 2 out of 10. I've got to go to like 8 out of 10 so that I don't think about the pain being a 7.
That's fantastic.
Yeah, it was mind boggling. And so like
Yeah.
now, like I like most of the things that I think are like problems in my training, like, oh, like my shoes rubbing against my sock, or it's like, oh, like the shirt is like chafing me. I go like, oh, just visualize Vasu's blister and then complaining.
Yeah. And I've heard you use the word exhilarating. It's one of my favorite words. And honestly, I don't hear it that often. So I'd love to know what is an exhilarating discovery that you have come across through sort of this whole sort of immersed experience through this endurance running?
As people will see in the movie, we spent time with a Navajo runner named Sean Martin. And I went on a run with Sean in one of the most beautiful canyons I have ever seen. And Sean goes running there every day. And when we finished our run and I looked at him, I realized he got more out of that run, which he's done 1,000 times or more actually, than I did. And he probably got more out of that run than I have got out of every run. Like you could see it in his face. Like there was just a freshness. There was just this like
Wow.
it's like he'd been cleansed by like a waterfall. And like I had like a handy wipe and like my it was like that evident. And so like over the course of our friendship and it's in the movie, like he said that when like Navajo are taught this, he said when Navajo run, they their feet are praying to Mother Earth. They're breathing in Father Sky. They're asking them for their blessings and they're showing them that we're willing to work for their blessings. And when you make a connection with Mother Earth and Father Sky, you don't just become a champion, you become a warrior. And that's kind of the first time that I stopped really listening to music while I ran. And it's legitimate, like it's an actual meditative practice to do this, I found. Whether you're on grass or in a canyon or on concrete, if you feel or if you imagine that when your feet hit the ground, they're praying to Mother Earth. Like you hear the sound, that's the sound of the prayer to Mother Earth. And when you breathe, you're breathing in Father Sky. You actually begin to feel that connection. You don't have to try to feel that connection. You do those two things, feel that your feet are praying to Mother Earth. And when you breathe, you imagine that you're breathing in the whole sky, Father Sky. You feel that sense of oneness that we talked about earlier.
Yeah.
That I thought only came from meditation. But then I realized that in running, you can feel that too. You can feel that you're one with the earth and the sky. And it's so tangible. And it blew my mind. And that's when I realized, oh, I know why the 3,100-mile runners run this race.
Wow.
They might not be conscious of how easy it is, like for someone who practices the connection between their feet and their breath, but they're doing it. And like, that's why they're doing it. Like once you enter into that state of flow, like you don't actually have any more problems for the moment. I mean, my runs will only be like an hour or 80 minutes, but you go, if I do this for 16 hours a day, like those guys are doing, like what is a problem? There is no problem. Like, yeah, you have a blister, you've got to change, it's raining, but like you said, those are just Those are circumstances.
Beautiful, beautiful. I have a final question from a dear friend of mine. He is going to be, his name is Stephen Redfern. Shout out, Stephen.
Oh yeah.
Do you know Stephen?
I'm gonna see him in a few days. He's got a couple Aussie friends here. Prachar Stegman, who's an old friend of his in Canberra. And then the only other Aussies are pretty gutsy, but there's only been one Aussie to do the race thus far. A guy named Grahak Cunningham from Perth. Grahak is here too, and I think they're
amazing.
They're preparing New York for Stephen's arrival.
Oh, it's so exciting! Honestly, I'm so excited to follow this journey of Stephen's, and I reached out to him yesterday and said, do you have any questions? So he submitted one, and it's pretty sort of speaking to your heart. He said he's about to undergo the 3,100 Self-Transcendence run for the first time. What would be one piece of advice that he could take into the race that would help me on his journey? And the way that I kind of intuit this, which I'm sure you do as well, is I don't think he's asking sort of obviously in relation to like a physical standpoint, but more of a spiritual.
That's a great question. Again, I haven't done the race, but I spent a long time out there for the movie, and then kind of subsequently just got enveloped by the beauty in the world that they created.
Yeah.
It's really to understand that every moment is going to be different. And that variation can bring you so much joy. Like if you just think of this race as being loop after loop after loop on the same surface, it'll break one's mind. But if you realize that each moment can be completely different from the next, really it begins by going, each phase of the day has a completely different quality. Everybody's got to show up at 6 a.m. So from like 6 a.m. to 10, from 10 to 2, from 2 to 6, from 6 to 12, it's a completely different time of day. You begin to recognize the beauty. It's like, yeah, you're running on concrete, but Sean Martin, our Navajo friend and character from the movie, his dad, a medicine man, said, Mother Earth is also under the sidewalk. When you focus on the moments and you focus on the little things, you start to see beauty everywhere. And then you don't have to be like in a meditative mode, or you don't have to be feeling like, you don't have to be feeling meditative. You don't have to be actively like seeking the answers to life and the secrets of the universe. From that beauty, all of your good qualities will begin to come out. And if Stephen, and I'm sure he'll do it, if he can stay aware of all the beauty that's surrounding him and all the beauty that there is to feel during the race, he'll experience that beauty. Ashprihanal Alto, who was in the movie, has completed the 3,100, I believe, 16 times now.
Wow.
And there's a reason why he does. There's a reason why he comes back over and over and over, because those 52 days, it's not just like a life-changing experience when you get to the end. Every single moment can make you a better person. And for most people in the race, even if those moments are measured in hours rather than seconds, they can see themselves growing as people and growing in their love and their happiness and their joy. And it's a beautiful thing to watch externally. And I'm going to be really, really excited to see how Stephen handles the elements, handles all of the circumstances thrown at him, and see him gradually begin to conquer them. And, witness what a different person he's going to be at the end than the beginning. As wonderful as everyone says he is, like to imagine that he's going to be even that much more wonderful by the end is a
Yeah.
really, really, really exciting thing.
Yeah. We're all excited and we're all here supporting you, Stephen. And thank you for your beautiful, thoughtful answer. And thank you for this beautiful, thoughtful conversation. Honestly, this is one of my favorite conversations. I could listen to you all day in the beautiful teachings and wisdom that you share. So thank you. I really appreciate it.
But I've listened to your podcast the last few weeks in preparation, and I was just thinking like, oh my goodness, I know she asks the best questions. I can't wait for my opportunity to like ask you a million questions. Doesn't have to be public or on the spot, but it's been great getting to know you.
Yeah, you too. Thank you. So on a final note, I would love to ask you, what does it mean to you to be human?
I think it means to love. I think that's the only thing that differentiates us from other beings. I do believe that plants love. We know that animals love, and some animals love better than most human beings.
Yeah.
But I think, and I've seen it with Sri Chinmoy, there's a level of love that human beings can experience and offer that's just so, I'll use your favorite word, that's just so exhilarating and awe-inspiring. And so I can't say that I'm the most loving person in the world. I can't say that I experience the depth of love every day, but for me, it's my goal, and it's I think it's what makes us good human beings.